Okay, a time to be just really honest and for us all to say these last 6 months have been they've been hard. For some of us, the hardest 6 months in our lifetimes, and thankfully that's not all of us and probably not even the majority of us. But it has been hard for almost everybody. I don't know anybody in my world that hasn't had significant difficulties because of this COVID-19 thing. People have lost income. They've lost jobs. There are people who've lost family members. Don't ever want to make light of that. There are people who have, if you stack up the losses that they've experienced, this has been a time of a prolonged period of losses, and that creates issues. And one of the issues that I see in myself, I see it in lots of other people during this time, is a thing that I wonder if this will be maybe the word that will mark these last months, not just in America, but for most of the world. And that word is anxiety. There's lots of different kinds of anxiety. And psychologists and human behavior experts, they categorize anxiety on kind of a scale of intensity. The garden variety of anxiety is called generalized anxiety, and that's where you just have this generalized feeling of anxiety. It's not that, see, there's a big difference between that kind of anxiety and the anxiety disorder where you have this debilitating attack of anxiety, or you're locked up with constant anxiety where it really has become a debilitating fear. That's horrible. If you've ever felt that, if you've ever been stuck there for even a brief period of time, you know that is awful. Wouldn't want it on anybody. In my personal experience, I've told you I struggle with anxiety, and really in reflection, for about as long as I can remember, from my adolescence on anyway, I have had this generalized anxiety thing. And then after my heart attack while I was in recovery, I experienced a measure of the anxiety disorder, and it was awful. It's given me a special sense of empathy, beyond sympathy to empathy, for people who experience that level of anxiety. And I suppose in that regard, it was a good thing. It also was a graphic reminder to me that I am not that strong. I am not bulletproof. It's funny what a heart attack will do to bring that home to you. And then it was like a dog pile. After that came this anxiety stuff. Well, Peter, in 1 Peter 5, where we've been looking into, in verse 7, he throws a lifeline to every single person in the world, I think. Maybe kids may not deal, although kids do deal with this generalized anxiety thing. And one of the things that promotes that in kids is that when the adults in their life are spinning with some level of anxiety, it just leaks out and onto them. They don't know why. They just know, well, we all are. It's a harsh thing. But listen to what Peter writes. Cast your anxiety on him because he cares for you. For me, this is maybe the most dynamic promise in Scripture, other than that God's grace has forgiven all my sin. the nothing is more important than that or bigger than that. But once you get past that, in my daily walk, in my life, normal life, as normal as it gets for me, this idea that God cares for me and He invites me to cast my cares on Him. This is huge. And it deserves a close look. And I know this sounds silly, but let's start with the first word, cast. It means to throw. It's a term often in the ancient world and in Peter's time that called up the picture of a fisherman casting their net, throwing their net out into the water and then drawing it back up, hopefully full of fish. Peter was a fisherman. It only makes sense that he would use a fishing kind of term. Cast, throw. You to do that, you throw it away from yourself, right? You don't throw it at yourself. I mean, that'd be stupid. Cast away from yourself. Okay, so this is like, duh, why would I even bring that up? Well, maybe you'll see as we go along. And cast your anxieties on Him. Your anxieties. Now, we live in a world that you're not the only one who's anxious. And I'm not sure, I don't think that's a bad prayer to say, God, please settle the anxiety that the world is feeling. I think anxiety can only be addressed and solved by the grace of Christ. And so that's not a bad prayer. But here Peter writes, cast your anxiety on Him. Well, okay, get ready, because I think this is one of the biggest ideas that I've ever come across. It is impossible to cast what I can't identify. I'll say it again. It's impossible to cast what I can't identify. Now, here's what happened in my life. I had these anxieties, and my prayer was, oh God, please take this anxiety away. I don't think that's a bad prayer, but until I was able to identify what am I anxious about, it was a less useful prayer. When this has been many years ago now, we lived in Las Vegas, and my mom and dad were here in Oklahoma, in Tulsa. Mom had Alzheimer's and was not doing well. And every time my phone buzzed or rang, I had this, it seized me up because of the anxiety. I was afraid that that was the call. And one day, I had talked with my dad, and things were ugly and not looking good. And I was just anxious. And God put a guy in my life, a good friend. I called him and I said, Michael, I am just so fearful right now. I'm so anxious. Would you pray for me? And he said, of course I'll pray for you. But let me ask you, what is your fear? Well, at that point, I was just all tied up with unspecific kinds of fear where I couldn't quite put my finger on it until when he asked me that question, it drew me up short. And I had to, what is my fear? That Mom would die? Well, see, I knew she was going to die. And to be honest with you, because of her anxiety, it would mean release for her. Not her anxiety, her Alzheimer's. Sorry, brain belch there. I'm not going to go into the whole big long story, but what he helped me do is identify what then I could cast on Christ. Cast, throw. And yes, it takes effort to throw it. It's not simply release it. Yeah, you have to release it if you're going to throw it. I kind of have the experience in my life that to just sit back and release my anxieties rarely works for me. Now, if it works for you, that's what you need to do, okay? I'm not critical of that idea. I'm just saying it may not work for everybody. Cast my anxiety, but you can't cast what you haven't identified. So let me just ask this question for the sake of application. What are you anxious about? Are you anxious for a specific thing, or is it just this generalized everything is making me anxious? Now, I'm getting ready to kind of sound like I'm on a rage here or a rant. So there's the warning, okay? I think there are a lot of factors in the world today there, and I'll call them forces. I don't know that that's the right word. Maybe the better word are agencies in the world today that want to keep you on the edge of anxiety. Now, I will confess to you, I just have this thing about news. It bothers me on so many levels that in our world today, we rarely just get the news. We generally get the news and what it should mean to us. I'm sorry. That about, I guess, 38 years ago, it quit working for me. I quit reading the newspaper, and that's one of the reasons why. The other was, every time I'd read the newspaper, I'd feel more and more depressed. And then probably the biggest reason is I knew that if I read the newspaper every morning, maybe I've told you this, I wouldn't have time to read Scripture. And so I gave it up, and honestly, it hasn't done anything bad for me. Well, I guess what I'm saying is it is to the advantage of most, I don't know one that is not true of, news agencies to keep you a little on the edge of anxiety. Because when you feel anxious, you'll do a couple of things. One is you'll keep listening, because there's a chance that anxiety, if you know more about what's happening and what it means, maybe your anxiety will dissipate some, right? And this is not a big conscious thought, but that's often what happens. And even here's the second thing, and this is where, okay, I'm reading motive in, I'll just admit it. But see, I don't think the primary mission, the real mission of a news agency is to tell you what's happening in the world. I think their real mission is to sell advertising, because that's the only way they can stay on the air and pay their staff. And okay, let's just be honest, it's about making money. You are a better target for buying whatever they advertise when you're a little bit on the edge of anxiety. Because when you're anxious, you are less likely to be as rational as you're capable of being. And that kind of sets you up when you're a little bit irrational. The ground is plowed for them to, plant seeds of consumerism, and you need this, and you believe this, and accept that. And okay, are they the devil? No. Are there good people in all of those agencies who really do want to bring the news and the truth and an accurate perspective? Yeah, there are. And yet, there is this thing that anxiety, our world kind of runs on the idea that if people are anxious, they are more easily manipulated. Okay. Now, if it all sounds like a conspiracy theory, I apologize for that. But I want you to drop back and think about your own life. Cast your anxiety on him because he cares for you. We live in a world that wants to stimulate and to sustain our anxiety because it sets us up to be more easily manipulated. See, if we're able to cast our anxiety on him, if our anxiety can be reduced, I'm not sure it's possible to eliminate it, but it can certainly be reduced. It makes us less vulnerable to, and I'm not even saying that the people trying to sell me stuff are the culprit, but we have an enemy. We're going to talk about him probably 2 or 3 installments away. But, so anxiety. Can you identify what you're anxious about? That'd be the task at hand. I'll come back to this idea because it's so profound when we get together next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.